data. And so we provide support services, national data services, on top of the local storage and repositories they already run, and we provide training and webinars, and we also have a series of funded projects in a number of disciplines. In these funded projects, we've also been asking the organisations to address FAIR and look at FAIR. So as they're working on making on data and tools, we're saying, well, how can you make that data more fair? So that's an integral part of their projects.
Great, great. Yeah, I'm really happy that you can be on the call, because we referenced your the web series that you've got on FAIR principles as background information for people who weren't very familiar with it. And some of us are newer to this than others, the FAIR principles, including myself. So it's great to have you on and can help us kind of interpret how to map these things that we're finding to the FAIR principles. So glad you could make it.
Yeah. One of the other things we've done is we've run a small survey nationally, asking people what do you see as well, first of all, are you aware of the FAIR principles? And then, if you are aware of them, what do you see as the easy wins, but also the harder things to tackle? It's been very instructive, and that's given us information to move on. So we're now planning further activities. We've got a FAIR awareness, a FAIR self-assessment tool that people can use. That's going to be coming online pretty soon, and we're also looking at to pick off a few of the things that people have indicated that they find difficult. So things like provenance is one of the really tricky ones to address.
Yeah.
So we're going to see if we can do some more work around that to help them in that space too. So.
Great, sounds good. Look forward to that. Well, Sophie.
Yeah, and it was also.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, indeed, about, and that's probably one of the things that we're talking about today, is if we're doing things in Australia, happy to disseminate them more widely and make sure that other people can use them too internationally. So just what are easy routes to do that? What is a good way to share that sort of information?
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that. We've got about 45 minutes of working together on doing the mapping, where there probably will be some discussion, but then there's a few minutes at the end to wrap up, and maybe we can talk about that then. That would be great.
Yep. Okay, cool.
Okay. Sophie, do you want to start? Sophie's our facilitator for this whole event.
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. So hi, everybody. My name is Sophie Howe. I am from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, but I'm working really closely with Nancy and Aaron and everybody at ESIP, as well as the AJUD Enabling Fair Data project on this event. And so thank you all for joining us today. And as some of you might be aware, we had a first session back in February, and we will be working from that material. And if you can look at your screen, and as Aaron has said, some of you are in web version, and I'm not sure if you see in the same view, but I can actually see some of you are identified as web version. And you are in a web version if you see a little flower icon on the right-hand side of the panel that's on top of the other functions like mute yourself or see material or so forth. So if you want, you can actually click on that little purple flower, and then it will ask you if you want to switch over to desktop, and then you'll be able to see some of the other functions. And mainly what we wanted to make available to you or make you aware of is we actually have 4 different documents that are available under the materials section. We have the aggregated DMT crowdsourced results spreadsheet, the examples of educational resources that Nancy will go over. We'll talk about today's agenda, and then finally there's a form that we will be using today to ask your help in evaluating the resources from the aggregated spreadsheet and deciding what kind of FAIR principles that the resources will be that will be relevant to. And Nancy will go over other materials, but the last thing I will mention is that I will be facilitating this meeting today. And so if you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and talk to the whole room. But if you like, you can also chat with me directly, and then I will be able to help in mentioning the question if you prefer to chat with me first and or remain anonymous with about for your questions. So that's all from me. Anything that people have questions really quickly before I hand the mic over to Nancy? All right, I think we're good. So Nancy,
okay, sounds good.
take it away.
So one of the things, first of all, if you're looking at the, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm Nancy Hobel-Heinrich. I work with Knowledge Motifs LLC and have been working closely with, I'm also co-chair of the Enabling Fair project along with John Petters, whom I think is on, I hope is on, to work on this particular targeted action group or adoption group that is, whose goal is to find these resources and map them to the FAIR principles. So, and I've been working with a great team of people who are also on and helping out. So one thing I wanted to mention, first of all, is if you look at the bottom of the, it's the 29 March 2018 DMT Crowdsourcing document, there's a place to add your name, affiliation, contact information, and initials you'll be using. So if you wouldn't mind starting that'd be great. We have your names as registration, but sometimes people either weren't able to register or they, and are here, or did register and are not able to come. So a record of who is here would be great. So what I wanted to do briefly before we really get going on the work is to, well, first of all, let's go through the schedule. So we were figuring that we've got about 15 minutes for this introduction, including what we're talking about right now, and then 45 minutes to really do the work of mapping the principles to the results that we found last event. And during this time, that would probably be a time for discussion or questions that people might have, and then we'll get back together and discuss how things went, what other kinds of questions or feedback we can get, and then close the meeting at about 15 after the hour. So, and I see John has sent a message too that as a general recommendation, which is a good idea. If you're not talking, please go ahead and mute yourself, so that it's easier to hear what else is going on in the discussions. So what I wanted to do then is to go back up again to this document that you're seeing. These are the links that we'll be working with. The first one is the Google Sheet that is the aggregated results tab, and that looks like this. So let's see, let me move this over here so people can see the whole thing. This is an aggregation, obviously, of all the results that we got from the 3 different approaches in the first event. So they're essentially in, the order is basically in group 1s, group 2s, group 3s, so there's no logic to it other than serendipity, but that's that one. And then let's see, going back, so this is the one that I'll talk a little bit more about how to work with it. The Google form then, as Sophie mentioned, is this mapping educational resources, which looks like this and is the source of information that we'll be using where you're doing the mapping. And I'll talk more about some aspects of this in a second. So then finally, in terms of other resources that are linked here, these project overview slides talk about the FAIR project, Enabling FAIR project per se. So if you're interested in seeing those, Erin provided those last time and they're still available. This Data Management Training Clearinghouse is simply a link to the clearinghouse if you've not seen it before. I'm going to assume that people know a little bit about it or can ask questions too, but it's not necessarily the focus of today overtly. There are some implications of looking at it, but we can talk about that later. And then the examples of educational resources and mapping to FAIR that I wanted to just cover briefly. So let me go to that. These are a couple slides that I'll just run through really fast to show you what some of the issues might be that as we're envisioning this being done. So again, the context for what we're doing in terms of this whole Enabling FAIR project in conjunction with the Data Management Training Clearinghouse was to identify the educational resources that can help researchers make their data fair. That was the first event. This is the mapping event, and then will be a couple of the other plans are to submit what we find, including the resources themselves and the mapping that's done to the clearinghouse, which will be ongoing. And then one of the final products is an assessment of what we came up with to prepare a partial gap analysis that will present to the whole Enabling FAIR project, and hopefully will give us some information about what kinds of educational resources people could be creating that are not present at the moment. So that's the plan. The goals are for the whole thing are just to develop awareness of both the principles, the Enabling FAIR project, and the clearinghouse, and then contribute to the inventory of resources with that focus on enabling FAIR data principles, and then generate broader engaged participation for both projects. So the workflow that we're anticipating, this is sort of hard to see this, but it's basically picking a resource from this aggregated spreadsheet that I showed you first, and taking some key information from it, and then taking it over to the Google form and filling out the form from there. So to just for a quick look at that, when you're looking at the spreadsheet, the key information that you might as well figure you're going to have to cut and paste and move over to this one, to the form itself, is the spreadsheet row number for the resource that you've got, the title of the resource, and the home page URL. And just to show you an example, this is the row number here, the title is here, and these are the contributor initials that we're interested in doing. So if you were on the call before and want to map your own resources, what you can do is go to, oh, this didn't show up, this column here. Oh my goodness, this is an older version. Anyway, this column here is where you would put your mapping, your initials. So let me just put that in. It didn't show up the way it should have. Mapping initials. So those would go there, and you can choose the ones you want. And then this information is what you would put into the form. So let's see, let me go back to the spreadsheet. So then, just to give an idea of how we've set up this form, there are different sections for each of the different principles. So there's one for findable, the F in FAIR, one for accessibility, the A, interoperability, and reusability. So, as you look at a resource, you would go down each of these sections and either check yes or no. All of them are required, except for the comments or questions below, because we're interested in having people, think about how these really could apply if possible. So that's the way we've set it up now. We'll take feedback on that at the end to see if that worked very well. But that's the basic idea. Let's see. So I wanted to show you then some examples of how this could be done. This is a pretty straightforward example. Somebody found a webinar on persistent identifiers, or PIDs. That's available on the web through the Thor project. You can't see it from here, but it's from the Thor project. That is a project in the UK, or Europe. I'm sorry. That's been useful for this kind of educational resource. And because it's about persistent identifier, which if you look at the FAIR principles on the Google form is pretty clearly related to what's called F1, identifying, having persistent identifiers assigned to the metadata and the data. So, this particular one is already in the clearinghouse, but you can see that the metadata on that screenshot to the right here represents that in terms of the descriptions that are available as part of the metadata scheme in the clearinghouse. So this is what will eventually result from what your work in mapping. And we can talk about how that's done if you're interested, but the main goal here is just to have people's experience and knowledge apply to that mapping. So the other thing I want to show you as an example is as you're doing this, you'll need to make some interpretations and choices about which ones should be applied. This is one that I thought was kind of an interesting example. Someone found a self-paced data tutorial series from Neon. Neon is an organization here in the States, and so they have a number of tutorials on this landing page that could be educational resources to be added to the clearinghouse. Now, I'll talk in a second about kind of levels of specificity, but this, as an example, could be considered, useful for reusability. It seemed to me because, it's about practice that is used with certain kinds of data, using a standard product, our product, and it could be applied to. You can't see this very well with the reusability, but actually maybe I can make that bigger. But issues that are the application of the sub-principles in reusability have to do with that use of standards, using domain-related community standards, et cetera, et cetera. So this might be a likely candidate for mapping to the FAIR principles. And I imagine this is the sort of thing we might talk about as we go through this, but just to give an example of, kind of the thinking that's been done so far. And then the last thing I want to show you in terms of an example is this concept that's also evident with this example of this is essentially a landing page for all these data skills tutorials. So one of the ways we've been approaching this in the clearinghouse is to assign, to create records for the sort of upper level itself, and call it a course, because we're using the educational metadata scheme. And so it's this particular level can have its own record with a mapping to FAIR. And then if people want to, you can also pick and choose or create records for all of these quote unquote units within this course with their own mapping to FAIR. So and of course that's definitely a choice, especially today. Well, not especially, but in any time, as to which level you want to apply. It's the other thing that I think is important to understand is that we make the connections between these two levels within the metadata itself by virtue of a couple of different metadata terms and and in the language of the description. So those connections continue to be made or are made rather, and then but by virtue of the specific the mapping for specific units within a course, people have a better chance of finding, more specific resources. And that's the upside of it, and that's one of the things we've been trying to do with a clearinghouse in general. The downside is the more you put in, you run into the problems of maintenance of these kinds of things if they change. So that's what we've been tossing around and working with in the clearinghouse, and to some extent in our discussions in this particular part of the project as well. But that's basically what I wanted to show you as background. Did anybody have any questions or thoughts about what you've seen, what we would want to do, how we would do it?
Thanks, Nancy. That's really interesting, and it's really great to see the work you're doing. Sorry, I'm not on a computer, so I don't have a great option to go through all the documents.
Sorry.
That's fine. One thing I was wondering, is there also an option there to select by discipline? Because we get a lot of questions from especially librarians and people that are supporting researchers saying, well, we're really interested in examples where FAIR is enabled for different disciplines.
Yes.
So do you have resources that talk about what does FAIR mean in health and medical data, or what does FAIR mean in geoscience data?
There are some that are definitely there. I mean, if we look at the aggregated results that we've got so far, one of the things was really wonderful to see, actually, as we did the first event is the way that people from different disciplines were, found resources that apply to their discipline, and that's definitely feedback we've gotten too from the clearinghouse as well. So in terms of what we've found so far that we could then, map FAIR to and submit to the clearinghouse, we do have those, and within the clearinghouse there's a capability of assigning different subject disciplines. It's not a
Okay,
perfect.
great.
It's not a perfect. It's a controlled vocabulary at this point, and it's how they are. They're never perfect.
Yep.
But we also have the ability to assign keywords as well, and a lot of times that's been a place where we, for instance, could assign something to ocean data or specific subject types of data as well that might relate to disciplines. So that's
okay. Thanks.
yeah. And actually, one more thing I should mention too that I think might be applicable here is one of the mechanisms by which people can pull together resources on the clearinghouse is using a filtering system and for different organizations, keywords, but also what we're calling a framework. So for instance, if organizations have pulled together resources that they have endorsed or really essentially created a collection, like for instance, or associated with a certain research data lifecycle. So, for instance, Data One has got a lifecycle that they've created resources for, and USGS has got one. The Data Preservation Network has another one. What we can do is establish a framework within the clearinghouse that then can be assigned to different resources. So one of the things we thought we might do, and we're still not sure how exactly to do this, but to have a framework for the FAIR data principles that that resources can be kind of associated with, and then also there's the capability of assigning keywords to specific principles. So that's one of the reasons we have, for instance, we have one. Let's see, I think it's called Accessibility Data FAIR Data Principles, and there's one for reusability. But we can also then go a little bit deeper if we want to into the more specific F1, F2, F3 if that seems like it's feasible to do. So that's another, to give you a context, that's one of the reasons we're thinking of doing it this way. Okay. All right. Well, that's all I had. Sophie, do you want to take it back and get people going?
Sure. And everyone, just in case you missed the beginning, again, all the documents that Nancy is sharing are under the Materials tab. And so if you're on the desktop version, it will be easy to see. It's just right underneath the attendees block. But if you're on the web version, you might have to go to that little document icon to see if you can see those. And if you don't get those, please let us know, and we can. I'm actually going to put it into the chat right now just to make sure you get access to the chat. The link to the spreadsheet, so that's the first thing I'm sending into the chat. And then I'm also sending into the chat link to the form that Nancy showed us, how to actually submit the information. And so if you can see the chat, again, that's the mechanism that you can communicate with me during the session, or you can just unmute yourself like Keith had done and talk to the whole room. But right now, as a next step, please feel welcome to go to the aggregated results spreadsheet, and as Nancy said, go all the way over to the column H, and I see that people are already starting to claim resources, so please feel free to go over there. And one last link that I'll put in is the agenda for today, and at the bottom of this agenda, we have a section where we are asking people to please check in or submit your participant information. And I think quite a few people have already done that. And we're asking you to please provide your name, your affiliation, contact information, and the initials that you will be using on the mapping form so we can know who is claiming which resource. All right. Does that all sound good for everybody? I take that as a yes, and so please let me know if you have any questions. And I will be claiming a resource myself, so I'll be working on the form too. Thanks. And Nancy? Nancy?
I had to unmute myself. Am I unmuted?
Oh, yes, yes, you are.
Okay.
I suppose, are you going to work on a resource yourself as well?
I can, or I thought I'd start, and then if need be, I can stop. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you want me to, I can share my screen as well because I will be going through that process. And if people wanted to, they can see what I'm doing. In case that would be a good reference. But
Sure, that
either is
sounds good.
fine.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
And I can
Okay.
watch the chat.
Great.
Sophie, I just passed you the presenter.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
Keith, are you able to do any work if you're not on the computer? Is there something else you want to do instead?
Are there any phone app-based resources that exist?
I don't know.
No, I was just looking. Indeed, I could on my phone. I could open and have to download Google Docs, and then I could edit the Google Doc. But it would be such a hassle to try and do all this on my iPhone. So I think I'll pass for now.
Okay.
One thing we are doing here nationally is, within ANZ's RDS Nectar, we've got a small team of our people just going around and collecting different resources that are already out there and mapping them to the Fair Data Principles. So that exercise is already happening here. We're going to have a web page up for that, I think probably next week or 2 weeks time. So that work is already happening. So I'm thinking, well, is there an easy way to bring that information across and put it into the table? And if look, they're already mapping those resources to the sort of headings FAI and R and things like that. So it probably shouldn't be too hard just to move that across. So I'll have a bit of a when I'm back in the office and when the team is back from their holidays, I can have a bit of a chat with them and see if there's an easy way to bring this information across.
Okay.
They'll have it in a spreadsheet too. So it's just probably rejigging the spreadsheet a bit and just pumping it across. Shouldn't be too hard, probably.
That would be great, because one of the things we're working on too with the clearinghouse, hopefully, is to find some way to bring things over in a bulk format. That's on our list of things that we want to do, but certainly using a Google Sheet, as a kind of a common denominator would be a great way to do that. So yeah, that'd be great. And then we can
have a
point. Yeah.
Yeah. So outside of this call, if you can email me the links to to some of the Google Docs you're using here, then I'll and I'll have a chat to the team and see if we can just move the information across easily.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah.
So just a question. I'm aware that this is, of course, a sort of a geosciences project, and it's around ESIP and AGU and things like that. Are you also interested in resources in completely other areas like biosciences, or?
We are. We kept the scope to science at this point, just because of so much of what we're doing is volunteer based and crowdsource based, and it started in the geosciences with USGS and Data One and ESIP, but definitely interested in adding different subject disciplines. Again, most of the connections we've got are with science, but and health, but we're also making connections into transportation and other areas as well. So yeah, we're interested in doing that. It's a question of who knows what and who's got resources that can contribute. So definitely we're interested in doing that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now then, I'll make sure that because I think we've also got some resources in some of these other areas. Certainly, the projects we're doing are in these other domains too. So I'll make sure that those are also included.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. It does sound like it'd be you all might be a good candidate for a first test to do kind of bulk loading or bulk exchange of resources. That would be great. So I'm happy to work with you on that too, as our group probably. So good.
Yeah, great.
So Sophie, it looks like Natalie has a hand raised. Hey Natalie, is there something going on?
Hey, no, I'm okay. I just couldn't hear for a while.
Oh,
I can hear now. Thank
okay.
you.
That's because
Sorry,
nobody's saying anything, Natalie.
Yeah,
Glad you're there.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Nancy.
I guess about the process now that they've looked at the form a little bit more.
You cut out part of it. I couldn't hear that.
Just wondering if people have any questions now that they've looked at the form a little bit now, and whether or not there's anything we can help in answering.
Well, I think one of the things that I came across was one in the spreadsheet, the title of the resource I was working with, which was the GIS data implementation or data sharing principles 33. The title in the spreadsheet is a little bit wrong, and then also the link that it leads to. When I tried to find the resource, I couldn't find the resource either. So if we could have maybe something in the form that, like, we tried to find it and couldn't.
Aaron, you could put that kind of comment in the bottom there of the form.
Okay. Got it. Okay. I'll do that.
Yeah. That's I noticed that too on one of the earlier ones. And sometimes the way the web pages work, they redirect whether you want to or not. So that's the kind of thing we usually explore when we're before we submit. But getting the title right helps a lot. If you can correct that sort of thing. Yeah. Thanks. Keith, if you're still there, can I ask you a question about the mapping, the way you all have been mapping resources about tools and that sort of thing? So we've been encouraging people to who've got tools related to data management, including preservation, like DMP Online and that sort of thing, to submit their resources. Seems like the mapping to FAIR would be in either the interoperability area or the reusability area. Is that the same approach that you all have been taking?
So, well, I guess when you say tools, there's different ways of thinking about them. You can think about tools as in tools that enable proper data management, and if they're a good tool, they enable different aspects of FAIR. We've got quite a few of those, but they're often not specific to one element of FAIR, but they're often across it. So, for example, the data management planning tool is usually something that's going to enable all the different 4 aspects of FAIR. So you often put them in a separate category as sort of infrastructure or tools that enable FAIR across the board. One other way of thinking about them, and that gets a little confusing, is whether the tools themselves are FAIR. So, that's actually a way of thinking about it, which makes it a bit confusing, because some people start talking about, yes, is my software FAIR? Is my software findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable? So we try to sort of take a step back and say, well, we're talking about data, and just purely from the data perspective. And is it software, or is it a tool that will enable making data FAIR?
So it sounds like you've been mapping to more than the principles as they have been promulgated with the different sublevels, or you're associating other terms as well, so like infrastructure.
To be honest, I'd have to have a bit of a look at where they got. I think we've just mapped to the highest levels, just F, A, I, and R. And but we've also sometimes I also find it useful to have sort of a different heading, which is sort of infrastructure, which enables FAIR.
Yeah, that's something that again we could do too with a keyword or a keyword approach sort of thing. Okay, that's good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Hi, Sophie, Nancy. I have a question about the Data One Best Practices database. I signed myself up to work on it, and I'm happy to since I was part of the group that created it. But I mentioned to Sophie I'm going to have to call off in a minute, and so I'm happy to work on this offline, but I wanted some feedback on the resolution, because the Best Practices database is made up of about 63, I think, best practices, and so each one has its own title. The database is a collection, has a URL, so it's probably going to cover everything, but that's not going to be helpful at the level of the full database. So do you want 63 different entries?
I think it really kind of depends on whether if you think those won't change that much below that top level. I think it's perfectly fine to have one mapping and one record for the top level. If in some ways it's a question of choice. That's part of what I was talking about the examples earlier. But when you're as consistent as that you are with you and your group is with what you're doing, and the thoughtfulness of everything putting together so that it is a true collection, I think it's fine to put it at that top level, and then in the description itself in the metadata record is where there would be probably examples of other subtopics and that kind of thing, so people know what's in there.
Okay, because I'm just, in terms of the mapping, I'm just thinking about if someone was to say, oh yes, it marks, we indicate that it touches on reusability, or it touches on accessibility. Not every, that might map to maybe 10 different best practices, and so identifying which one, because we don't have them tagged that way, but it actually makes me think maybe we should use those as a keyword within our best practices database itself to help with that mapping.
Well, I do think that would be useful, because I think that those two categories in particular are ones that are difficult. It's more difficult to find resources on those topics. So, in particular, reusability and interoperability seem to be troublesome. So, again, other approaches we've taken are to have a course and then have only create records for specific ones within as examples of or. So I think it'd be great, if you want to do it that way, 1 in 10, for example, or 1 in 5 on, with the terms. If you have keywords to suggest for those, there's a place to put that down on the form itself too. So that's great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Going on mute again.
Hi, this is Nancy.
Yeah.
I actually have a similar issue as Ember. I'm actually looking at the 23 Things libraries for research data. So basically, it's a list of different resources. So it is an aggregate, I suppose. And so I'm doing it at the top level, and just to cover the collection level, not the individual items, because there are also other 22 items in there. So I think at this point, I wouldn't want to go into each one of them. I'm only doing the top level. So at this point, I should say in the beginning, that's okay, right? And I can put that comment in the back, basically saying, if we wanted to, as a second iteration, we can definitely add to this collection level to describe the additional 23 items that we have in this collection. Ooh, hello?
I said I was unmuted. I mean, I was
sorry.
muted. I said,
Okay.
yes, that's yes, that's what I would do too. That makes sense. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. No, not at all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question too. This is Ramona, and I actually missed the first call. I'm from Cyber, so we had some other Cyber staff members took part in the first half, and I'm covering the second half. So sorry if I'm asking questions that were covered in the previous workshop. So I'm trying to assess a resource. It's the Cyber Data Commons Wiki, which I've written most of, so I know very well. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't. So it doesn't cover specifically topics like I'm trying to understand what it means. Does a resource cover the following topics? If you have a topic like metadata in a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge representation, our users could care less about that. So the wiki doesn't describe any about that. What the wiki does is teach users how to supply their metadata so that it will be available in that format. Is your goal here to really get resources that teach researchers about what FAIR is, or is it to get resources that help researchers make their data fair?
Both.
Okay, so how do I answer? So if it answers one of those things, should I say yes?
Yeah, that's what I would do. I would say yes to if there's a specific topic covered in the resource that like persistent identifiers, or I forgot the example already that you gave, but if there's a yes to that, then answer yes, and the rest would be no. You can also put a comment at the bottom that says, something about offered at a more general level or something like that.
Right. Okay. Okay. And then just as a basic comment, there's no, for some reason, unaccessible. There's no way to add a comment. There is on all the other ones.
Oh, okay. We lost that. All right.
Well, you can add that now, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, actually, maybe I will. And you can also add at the very bottom of the.
Yeah, at the very. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ramona, I have added that now to accessibility. I don't know what it means though. If you refresh it, you might, I don't know if you lose your data or not. So if you put the comment at the bottom, then it'll be there.
It's not urgent for me to add a comment in this particular one.
Okay.
I just wanted to make you aware I was missing there.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Yep.
Sure thing.
Hi, everyone. So we are on schedule for our next item for the agenda. For the next 10 minutes, we have allocated for just coming back together and talk about what we've done and what we found. So I'm wondering how's everyone doing? Is this a good time to break in your assessment, or do we need a few more minutes to finish up the resource that you're working on right now?
I've just
I'm ready to
started
come
one,
back,
so
but I happen to have just finished one, so I'll just wait.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe we'll pause everybody's somebody has said they just started one, so maybe we'll pause a little bit, and then maybe towards the end, once we cover everything, if people just want to finish off their resources at the end, that would be really great. Because yeah, I'm actually halfway through mine as well. I'm at accessible for my resource, but I thought just to have the opportunity to get everybody to talk about what they have done, that would be really helpful. So when I'm doing this, I'm curious how much time people are spending on each resource. So for the last few minutes, I was able to do 2, and it seems like I'm taking, even though they're just texts or they're just articles, it's taking me a longer time than I originally thought to assess the resources. What are people's thoughts? How difficult is it for you to evaluate these resources?
So I did 2 that were my own resources, and they were really easy. I didn't have to look at them, but I knew the answers to them already. I mean, resources that I've contributed to quite a lot, so I could just go through those really quick. But then when I got to the third one, which was, like you said, an article, I realized basically I'm going to have to read the whole paper, even though it's a short paper. So that's going to take me probably, at least an hour or more to skim it and get the answers that I need.
Okay, so we have self-assessment is easy, but assessing another person might be difficult.
And very educational and a little painful.
Sure. Other thoughts?
I mean, the materials weren't written with this goal in mind, but it's a goal that I would like to have. So doing this assessment made me realize these huge gaps in our material.
Oh, good. That's good to know.
Good and bad.
Yeah.
Well,
we didn't try to train people about what FAIR was and we were trying to just help them publish FAIR data. That was our goal, and not to sort of teach them, why it was, so some of it was pretty minimal.
That's interesting. So that is kind of a gap then, isn't it? That it's the whole concept of training people how to do their own work, to make their own data fair, as opposed to teaching them about FAIR itself. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, right. So like I said, we weren't that interested in teaching them about FAIR. Certainly not at the time. That's an interest that's grown, and we just haven't caught up to it yet. But even when we started these materials, FAIR was a really new thing, and so even though we felt we were following them pretty well, it wasn't written into the material, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because it just didn't exist when we were like, well, this is just the stuff we wanted to do. And then the FAIR principles came along and sort of elucidated it very nicely. It's like, yep, that's right. That's what we've been doing. Good. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it also argues for having people when you create the resources yourself, doing that assessment as part of the analysis part. Yeah, just like any other data creation, the person who knows it the best should be the one describing it. So yeah. Good.
This is John. I'm going to second actually what we just said. The last one I tried to do here was on metadata training from NOAA, talking about ISO 19115 metadata. So I know that this is focusing on metadata, so some things are not going to be appropriate or covered in FAIR, not really so much about accessibility and whatnot, maybe some aspects. But I don't know this metadata standard like the back of my hand. Does it address licensing directly? Probably does, but I don't know the standard really well. I'd have to dig into it. It would take a long time to evaluate it. I know there's people in the environmental science field who know this metadata standard like the back of their hand, and they could do this in 5 minutes. But it'll take me a long time. So finding the people who are experts in these resources and getting there and listening to their help would create time. That would take time itself, but you would probably get really more accurate assessments that way.
And that's a really good feedback, Nancy, since we are looking at how we could scale this experience or this process so we can categorize our resources more effectively. We definitely need to think of a balance, think of a way to balance between really know the materials well, which will take time because not all the originators or all the creators can come back and categorize the resource versus what is good enough so that people can still find the right resources, but then perhaps as they go through the resource, they will find out there are other uses that we just couldn't do at the maybe second degree analysis. So yeah, that's a good feedback from John.
Yeah, and maybe there are other ways of doing it too, with either annotations or ranking on resources. That's something we've thought about as well. That's another way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And like John said too, though, what would be the right spread of a committee that could actually cover enough different areas so that this committee would agree on the assessment. So we might not necessarily just lean towards, okay, someone who knows metadata really well, so can only do metadata resources really well. So yeah, a good mixture of knowledge of the reviewer would be really helpful.
Expertise,
Yeah. Anything else?
Hi, this is Raleigh. So maybe I just got a string of bad luck, but I ran into a series of resources that were training, but they weren't necessarily specific enough to address FAIR principles. So, for example, they were a tutorial of how to use a particular resource for a particular repository. And maybe this gets back to the earlier comments that not all of these components of FAIR are necessarily visible to the user. But as someone unfamiliar with the resource and not necessarily in a position to take the time to get to know the data repository itself, I felt unable to necessarily give an accurate assessment of whether that repository had fulfilled those FAIR requirements. In a way, that seems almost more like a task for the mapping repositories group versus the mapping training group. There's probably a lot of overlap there, and I'm not sure how to handle that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Raleigh. And actually, the last one that I'm working on is also a very specific example of how to work on, how to create a database, basically. And then I'm looking at the FAIR principles, and I'm actually being pretty liberal in terms of extrapolating what they're teaching to what I think will be good mapping to the FAIR principles. So, for example, I'm thinking, yeah, the database is based on SQL. That's the topic that they're talking about. So yeah, it kind of fits the standard communication protocol. So I click yes for A1, the first principle for accessible. But I think the resources I evaluate will probably be more general. In that sense, I would tend to just give I'll assign the principle just because it kind of touches on it. So again, in terms of just the depth or the relevance, I think that is an area I feel we probably would need to evaluate a little bit more, just how to gauge how tightly or how closely we can map these topics to a resource.
Well, that's one of the things that I thought was interesting about what Keith was suggesting in terms of more specific aspect of FAIR principles. So the example we talked about was tools and tools for a specific purpose. And if one of the keywords that's available is infrastructure to enable FAIR data, then you could, with that kind of example you gave, you could maybe assign it to interoperability or to reusability, and then include a more specific keyword such as infrastructure to enable.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are different levels at which these could be mapped to, which
Mm-hmm.
will bear some thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought this was. It took me some time to go into one of the resources, and Raleigh, I see that you tried to map one of the ones that I put in about the UK data service training, which are great for using a particular resource, but I actually went into them earlier and I was like, oh, these are not really, I can't see any obvious links to the principles.
Yeah.
So it is, I think this, might also be a good criteria exercise, like an evaluation exercise, like, how do all of these resources appear in the Data Management Training Clearinghouse, or can we, in looking at them, these really aren't fitting the purpose of what we're trying to do, so take those out.
Well, that's definitely part of the evaluation we'll go through before submitting them. Yeah. So it's true. I think it's true that not all of these will show up in there, but in terms of this exercise of finding what people know about and the way people interpret it, I think it's been really useful to help think about what the different ways that people learn, the different ways that the different kinds of information people need and can offer, and that's the sort of feedback we can give to the Enabling FAIR project, as well as then assess how and whether to include them into the inventory of the clearinghouse too. So those were two of the goals and two of the problems we foresaw kind of in doing this. But so it's interesting that it's been corroborated, really.
Yeah. Anything else that people want to say, provide as input, since we're actually on time to do our closing? Anything else that people want to share?
I wanted to ask if people would find it useful to keep this open for a while, another day or two, to finish up what you're doing in case you can't do it now. I mean, all these tools, the spreadsheet is available for anyone who's got the link. The Google form is available for anyone who has the link. The references are, so people could continue to add to them if you wanted to, if that would be useful. We probably won't start the analysis of the gap analysis in the report until next week at least. So that's something we could keep it open for a while.
I would find that useful.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Nancy. I mean, maybe until the end of next week, like next Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah, Nancy, I agree, and I'm wondering if you would be okay just after the meeting for you or for the group to send out just a quick summary, because we actually did really well in terms of like what people claim. We claim a third of what were submitted originally, and so given the number of attendees or the number of people who could stay, I thought that was pretty good. And then if we could just let people know there are still a bit more that people can help in reviewing and submitting, maybe we'll get some more by the end of next week. So I think that's a good idea too.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, so thank you very, sorry, it's Keith here. Thank you very much for setting this up. It's really, really helpful to get a better sense of what you're trying to achieve and how you're setting it all up and the structure. I'll I'll get back to the team, and we'll see how we can best get the information across.
Okay.
And sorry, because it's public holiday, and Monday, Tuesday also will be sort of public holiday for quite a few people here anyway.
Good.
It might not all come in next week, but happy to have if you send through the links, I'll have a look and see how we can get the information across in some form or other, and work on this together.
That sounds great. That sounds great. Yeah, it'd be really nice to work together more closely, because you're obviously doing, and you're ahead of us. So it'd be nice to learn from what you're doing as well. So that would be great, Keith. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you too. And it's especially if there's resources in specific discipline areas, that would be really useful for us in our community. So that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you for setting this up.
Yep, sounds good. The only other thing I would mention is that if you're interested in continuing discussions of this, and this is to everybody, we do have this working group that meets once a month and has a listserv. The meeting might be difficult. It's at 8:30 Pacific on the first Thursday of the month, so it might be difficult for some people to make that. But we do have a listserv too, where we do some discussion and then put out notices and results of these kinds of things too. So if you're interested in being part of that, you can send a note to me, or and then I can add you as well. So that's all I have to say. So thank you, everybody, and we'll leave it open for a week or so, till the end of the week, of next week. That sounds good.
Great. Thank you for organizing this, Nancy.
Oh, hey, Nancy.
Yep.
Leslie, you've got a hand up. I didn't realize Leslie was on the phone.
Yes.
Hi, Leslie. Was there a hand that needed attention?
It's Leslie.
Oh, that
Leslie Wyborn. Sorry.
Yes, Wyborn, yes.
Leslie, you're muted. Okay. Maybe it's nothing.
You go up, Leslie, up on the top left. There's a little microphone that should. If it's green, that means you're unmuted.
Maybe it was nothing. But anyway, okay.
She's muted is the problem. So she can't. Okay, put in the link. Link to what, Leslie? Oh, can we unmute Leslie? We can do that, can't we?
No, I can't unmute. I can only mute her. I can't. I sent her an unmute request, but I can't unmute somebody.
Oh, okay. Shoot. Oh, to the listserv. Yes, I will. Okay, the link to the listserv. I see. Thank you. Let me see if I can find that. It's how do you do that? Just ESIP. At list.is this right, Erin? .org.
I can't see your.
It's ESIP. Oh, me too. All.
Yeah.
ESIP.
Yep. That's right.
Okay. Thanks, Raleigh. Yeah. So that's it, Leslie. And I can send it. I'll send it out too in the results. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the help.
Great. Thanks.
Cool. Yep.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yep.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.